One of Deepwoken's most captivating parts is the lore. However, Deepwoken lore is rarely expanded upon, as a majority of updates do not contain the important lore in PvE that most of the player base wants. In today's video, I want to go over all the unfinished plot lines and what updates they'd be associated with and how the developers could go about them. Make sure to subscribe, since according to YouTube's totally not bugged UI, 0% of the people watching my videos right now are actually subscribed. And also check out my live channel or Wipe You IRL. Go watch the live channel after this video. Now let's get straight into it. Also, I would like to say I finally got some new chime footage for you guys. Oh my god, I know you guys are so happy. I fought 4 people in the recording of this, 4 in a row. I won all 4 after not playing in like 2 months. And these are just some of the weirdest fights I've ever had in my entire life. Also, excuse my bad fighting against a Thundercall guy. I've never seen half of those moves before, so I was kind of learning how to fight him mid-fight, okay? But just like, look at the chime footage in this video. It's so weird. I'm your Uber driver. Get in. Alright, so first of all, the most important would be the Lord Regent's plotline, and eventually assassinating the Lord Regent, which is probably something that has to happen, right? The last advancement we got towards the Lord Regent's lore was the Vow of Iron update, in which he wielded the memories of fallen Table of Honor members in order to try and fight the Lord Regent and find his weaknesses. Now, despite this update being seemingly important as far as progressing this plotline of the eventual defeat of the Lord Regent goes, it actually didn't do anything to further our understanding of the Lord Regent or give us more direct lore involving him. Also, there was supposed to be a major Vow of Iron update back in January, but there's absolutely no news involving that at this point in time, and it may just not come at all given the fact that the Vow of Iron seems kind of complete for now, unless they want to add a new storyline to it. We also don't really know any of the plans for defeating the Lord Regent, other than the fact that Maestro Evangard Rest is currently trying to collect the strongest people in all of Lumen to overthrow the Lord Regent, and also be able to defend against the conquestial forces of the Central Authority. Conquest. Anyway, also the Ceramide Hollow update was supposed to come before Vow of Iron. I think that's just funny to bring up. And speaking of the Central Authority, there is a lot to tie up here, and they are the most likely to get an update with the exception of Layer 3, but I'll go over that in a second. So far, the Central Lumen and the Central Authority have a lot of stake in the overall story of Deepwoken. There's the looming threat of them actually raiding the Etrian Luminant because they have the Lightkeeper Vic captive, and are, as we know, currently and have been torturing Vic for probably years at this point. It's hard to tell because the year timekeeping in Deepwoken is sadly not canon for regular timekeeping. Along with that, there's still the mystery of unveiling Dralis Heir, who was leaked to be the Deepwoken, the Thundercall attunement in a Discord message of all things. But sadly, when the lore of this game is rarely updated on, most of it ends up coming from developer statements on Discord, which is lame, but it's a necessity, I guess. Then there's the entire Etras versus Central Luminant war arc, which is a pretty high possibility. There's 2 ways the devs could handle that and the Central Luminant. Either 1, Claris helps you get to the Central Luminant to save Vic, and that's how they handle the Central Luminant's addition to the game, while avoiding the Central Authority from raiding the Etrian Luminant and causing that whole war, which honestly I'd rather see that. Or 2, Vic ends up giving into the Central Authority, and then from there opens a big gate between the 2 Luminants, which would then start a 3-way war between the Lord Regent and the Ministry with the support of the Etrian forces, the Maestro Evangard and his rebellion group consisting of Vigils and player-obtained allies, and the Central Authority. At the same time, it'd make the Central Luminant accessible, which would then show us the homes for the Central Authority, the Knives of Eyeless, or Whalers as they're more commonly known in the Central Luminant, the Marker, which is the overworld base of the Divers, or sorry, the Marker Citadel, and the Lullaby Isles. Now, there is a ton of lore to unpack here. First of all, which is actually my favorite, is the Lullaby Isles. This entire place is kind of like an uneasy security state archipelago of islands, which is headed by the cult-like leader Lady Confessor. If you guys have watched Attack on Titan, the Lady Confessor is like King Fritz. She keeps her people worshipping her, and those who go against her word go against her law and disappear mysteriously. Sad to say, it's very likely the Lady Confessor and the Lullaby Isles would end up getting sidelined. Despite the fact that it could make for a cool boss opportunity or resistance against the corrupt leadership, it's on a much smaller scale than the Central Authority, and given the poor organization of lore in Deepwoken, it would likely remain mostly untouched as far as player advancement potential goes. Then we have the Knives of Eyeless main territory, which could provide stuff in relation to them, like some kind of origin expansion, and more lore expansion stuff, because right now the Knives of Eyeless are kind of bare, and only really act like a mercenary group who works for the Central Authority. And then of course the Overworld Divers, who literally have a base of operations in the Central Luminant, and given their influence, I wouldn't be surprised if Castlelight had some sort of way to get from Castlelight to Marker, and maybe that could be the way into the Central Luminant, especially since we saw in the Vow of Iron it's possible to make a deal with the Trial Voices to be risen into specific areas of the Overworld and Lumen. So what if the way that we get into the Central Luminant is by making a deal with the Voices? And then there's all the Central Authority stuff, which honestly I think is some of the least interesting part of the Central Luminant, ironically. At least their main stuff, which is literally just they want to take over the world. Oh my god, it's so bad. Like, for example, one thing that's really cool that most of you probably don't know about that I actually haven't even covered in a lore video because I just didn't think it was that, it didn't really fit into anywhere, was Mount Monet and Fort Monet. So Fort Monet is a now desecrated and abandoned fortress built out of Mount Monet in the central Luminant, in which all the troops inside have become infected by something and gone kind of insane, like a little small zombie outbreak. The entire lore behind Fort Monet is literally inspired by Soma and Signalis, so imagine how cool it would be to venture down into Fort Monet, and it's a zombie-infested crawl through the fort to retrieve something needed for progressing through the story, like saving Vic. But honestly, I think this is another piece of lore that would go underdeveloped with Fort Monet, likely being some sort of void zone side place that if implemented would be as boring as a Crypt of the Unbroken, despite being really cool conceptually. Like, I think it would be fun if they just turned Deepwoken into a horror game while you were down there. Just complete different change of mechanics, just complete different game, just actual horror game as soon as you're down there. I honestly don't really want to talk about the Central Authority anyway, because they're kind of bare. So the next unfinished plotline would be every other Luminant. The Southern Luminant is the only one the developers said that they'd never add, as it's mostly Void Sea now, but it used to be the equivalent of one big North American forest. So honestly, if they wanted to, they could retcon that, and then they could literally just make it like the Appalachian Mountains, and you're fighting like Wendigos and shit. That would be really fun, actually. Anyway, my personal favorite Luminant in the lore is going to be the Northern Luminant. Imagine Rogue Lineage Tundra. If you don't know what that is, imagine the worst place ever that's cold. It'd be less like Layer 2 and more like an actual tundra all throughout, with mountains and like boat places to sail through. And it is the home of the Elder Eden Kite, and it's also where the Drakard hail from, which implies that despite it being mostly frozen tundra, it also likely has some sort of volcanic mountains that the Drakard likely lived on. Huh, kinda like the Rogue Lineage Tundra. I wonder if it's inspired. Then there's the entirety of the Western Luminant, which is home to the Khans and the 100 Legions, as well as the birthplace of Amoris Pleatsky and the founding of Flamecharm, I believe, and I'll talk about all that in a second. Then the cultish Star Kindred Church also comes from the Western Luminant, and over there their influence actually rivals the 100 Legions, so they're much more powerful, but they haven't expanded nearly as much as the Legions have, which means we could see more Dark Lore cultist shit if we ever get the Western Luminant, but it may relate to Pleatsky, but more than likely it'll probably mostly relate to Pleatsky and the Deepwoken and the Flame Attunement or the Hundreds Legion, because despite the fact that the Star Kindred Church is about as influential as the 100 Legions, they are less mentioned in the game now, which means the developers aren't going to expand them that much, I don't think. And speaking of the Deepwoken, there is so much lore untouched here. We literally know the Deepwoken for every naturally occurring attunement but Gale at this point. Pleatsky is the Flamecharm Deepwoken, who resides in the third layer of the depths and is potentially an ally due to his chill nature, according to Archmage. Dralis Air is the Thundercall Deepwoken, and he's rarely mentioned and apparently never seen in game, to the point where people think he is actually a myth within the world of Lumen. And then the Shadowcast Deepwoken is the first prophet of the Ministry, who's down the void-like layer of the depths, which is something like layer 9. Which, along with that, all the other attunements have quite a lot of lore, but Frostra actually doesn't really have any, or at least none that really matters. We know the Deepwoken for pretty much every of the naturalistic attunements, and then the one that doesn't have it is Gale, which instead has layer 2, which comes with its own lore, and Drowned God. But we don't know the Drowned God, or if there is even any Deepwoken involved with the Frostra attunement, which is really weird in my opinion, because we basically have nothing on that attunement at all. And speaking of layers of the depths, there's technically infinite, but we know about the following. Layer 3 is the Coral Fiend's domain and the Flame Layer where Pleatsky resides. It is somehow accessible directly from Lumen without having to go through the depths, and along with that there's actually camps or at least small cities of people that live down there, because it's a pretty chill place, I guess, compared to the first two. Then there's also like Layer 9, which is just inky black void, and the first prophet is just down there meditating, I guess, trying to cause another great drowning. Which brings me to the Ministry. They are still just being evil, and while yes, the Lord Regent is connected to them, not only is he only the fourth strongest amongst them, but he's also not really directly related to what they're doing outside of Etris. Like, yes, he has similar goals and wants to spread their influence, but what he does is pretty much detached, so we don't really know about much lore about the Ministry and the other prophets. We know the second prophet is the creator of the Bloodrend attunement, which is very significant. We don't know anything about the third prophet, and we know the first prophet is the Deepwoken for Shadowcast. Why have we not gotten any more lore or prophets? Especially because Zaire is only the fourth strongest, and he's the current Lord Regent, but there's not 9 prophets. Why do we have no information on 7 of them, and the ones we do have information are 4, 1, and 2? Where are the other 7? I want to see more prophets, Deepwoken. And maybe kill like the 9 for the 8th prophet just to make a statement. It'd be cool. Anyway, that's most of it. There's a lot of lore in the game which will be underutilized, of course. If there's anything major I forgot, then please let me know down in the comments section down below. And no, Linkstrider being unfinished doesn't count as major lore. That's not a plot line. That is literally just like small subtext lore, essentially. I read every comment. You guys know the drill by now, right? Watch the live channel. New song for YouTube members of every tier. So if you want to listen to my song covers and go, you know, buy a YouTube membership. I make one a month, and I'll be dropping another one in like 2 weeks or so. So buy a YouTube membership to hear my covers. Shout out to YouTube members of tier 2 or higher: Green, Philip, Delusional Mo, Broccoli, Akio Sugi Kuni, Xerxes, IXKMB, Unigeo, Fun Guns, Abridged Gauther, and Drizzy Drake Fan. I love you all as usual. Have an amazing day, and goodbye.